Welcome to Bleeding Walls, a place where every shadow hides a secret and every silence has a scream. Tonight, we'll step into the darkest corners of family bonds. True sibling horror stories, where twins mirror more than just faces, and brothers and sisters share nightmares that never end. If you dare to walk with us through these chilling encounters, make sure to subscribe to Bleeding Walls and turn on the bell. Because the walls are already whispering, and you don't want to miss what they say next. Claire Dawson had always hated the silence. Growing up in the sprawling, drafty farmhouse on the edge of town, silence never felt peaceful. It was suffocating. The house creaked and sighed like an old body, and when it went still, it was as though it was holding its breath. Yet Claire never truly felt alone in it, not even as a child. Her mother used to say it was because Claire was never supposed to be alone. She was born a twin, though her brother, Evan, hadn't survived past the first night. It wasn't something the family talked about often. It was the kind of tragedy that settled like dust over the years, rarely disturbed. But the fact remained. Claire came into the world with another heartbeat beside hers, and for some reason, she carried the sense that his absence had left a shadow lingering just behind her. By the time she was in her 20s, living back at the farmhouse after her father's death, the shadow was heavier than ever. She told herself it was just grief, the weight of too many quiet nights in too many empty rooms, but that didn't explain the whispers. They began subtly enough, almost like the remnants of a dream clinging to her as she woke. A low murmur, a sound that could have been the wind slipping through the window cracks, but as the weeks wore on, the whispers grew clearer, closer, until Claire could almost make out words. Claire. The first time she heard it, her blood went cold. She had been lying awake in her childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling while the branches scraped against the window. She told herself she had imagined it, but then it came again, faint, from the left side of the bed, the side no one had ever slept in. Claire. She bolted upright, fumbling for the lamp, her breath catching, the room flooded with warm light, chasing away the shadows. Nothing. Just her dresser, her desk, her old bookshelf crowded with worn paperbacks. But her heart hammered so violently in her chest that she stayed awake until dawn, unwilling to close her eyes again. The whispers didn't stop. Night after night she would hear them when the house grew quiet enough, always from the empty side of the bed. Sometimes it was only her name, soft and drawn out, like a sigh. Other times it was a low hum, rhythmic, as though someone were breathing words into her ear. She told her mother once, hesitantly, over tea at the kitchen table. Her mother's face went pale, and for a long moment she just stared into her mug before shaking her head. "You mustn't talk about that," she said firmly. "It's not good to invite things like that in." "Things like what?" Claire asked. Her mother didn't answer. She only pushed her chair back, muttering about chores, leaving her daughter with more unease than before. The whispers became a ritual. Midnight would come, and the silence would thicken until Claire almost couldn't breathe. Then the voice would slip through, curling around her like smoke, and though it terrified her, she couldn't help but listen. Claire. Sometimes it was almost pleading. Other times it carried a note of anger, sharp and cutting, and sometimes it was laughing. She tried recording it once, setting her phone beside the bed. In the morning, the file was blank. Nothing but her own shifting breaths under the blankets. Yet when she listened with the phone still in her hand, the whisper came again, right beside her ear. "Don't leave me." Claire threw the phone across the room. Her dreams grew strange. She began to dream of a boy who looked like her, same pale eyes, same crooked nose, but thinner, with a gauntness in his face that unsettled her. He stood at the edge of the bed in her dreams, watching her sleep. His lips moved, whispering, but she could never hear the words. When she woke, the room felt colder. One night, the whispers escalated. She woke to the mattress dipping beside her, the weight of someone lying down. Every hair on her body stood on end. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared at the ceiling as the sound of steady breathing filled the silence. Slowly, she turned her head. The sheets beside her were pressed down, as though an invisible body was stretched out next to her. She could almost see the outline, shoulders, the curve of a hip, legs, and then, right by her ear. "You left me," Claire screamed. She bolted from the bed, tripping over the rug, crashing into the dresser. The lamp toppled, the bulb shattering in a burst of sparks, plunging the room into darkness. She didn't stop running until she was outside, barefoot on the cold grass, gulping in the night air like she was drowning. She refused to sleep in that bed again. For weeks, she avoided the room, dozing on the couch or in the guest bedroom downstairs. Yet no matter where she slept, the whispers followed. She would wake in the night to hear her name drifting through the dark, closer and closer, until it was at her bedside again. Her mother grew thinner, paler, as though she too were being drained by the house. When Claire confronted her again, desperate, her mother finally confessed. "You were never alone," she whispered, clutching Claire's hand. "Even when he died, he never left. I used to hear him too when you were a baby. I thought he would fade with time, but he's still here." "Why?" Claire demanded. "Why? Is he still here?" Her mother shook her head, tears welling. "He was never baptized. They told me it was just an old superstition, but I know better. He's stuck, and he's angry." That night, Claire dreamt more vividly than ever before. In the dream, she was lying in bed, paralyzed, while the boy, her twin, climbed beneath the covers. His face hovered above hers, pale and sunken, his eyes wide with something like hunger. "You stole my life," he whispered. "It should have been mine." She woke screaming, clawing at the blankets, convinced he was still there, but the bed was empty. Only the lingering press of cold sheets told her otherwise. Days bled together in a haze of sleeplessness and fear. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. The air grew heavier, colder. Once, as she brushed her teeth in the bathroom, she saw in the mirror not her own reflection, but both of them, herself and the gaunt boy standing just over her shoulder, smiling faintly. The worst came one stormy night in October. The farmhouse groaned under the wind, rain lashing at the windows. Claire sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, too afraid to climb the stairs. The whisper came, soft but insistent, from the staircase. "Claire." She froze. The whisper grew louder. "Claire, come." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Leave me alone." "Claire." The voice deepened, cracked with fury. "You're mine." The lights flickered. The air turned icy, her breath pluming in front of her. And then she saw him, half in shadow, half in light, standing at the top of the stairs, her twin. His eyes glowed faintly, hollow and hungry. Claire stumbled back, her body trembling violently. "You're not real," she choked out. But he only smiled. And as he stepped down the stairs, his form flickered, shifting between solid and smoke. "Don't leave me again." She backed into the wall, nowhere to run. The whispers swelled into a roar, hundreds of voices layered over one another, all hissing her name. And as the storm raged outside, she felt the walls of the farmhouse pulsing, bleeding with sound, bleeding with him. Her scream drowned in the thunder. By morning, the house was silent again. Her mother found the living room empty, the blanket crumpled on the floor. Only one thing remained, the indent of two bodies pressed into the couch cushions, side by side, as though siblings had finally been reunited. Ethan Taylor was 8 years old when he first realized that mirrors could lie. The discovery came one rainy afternoon when he and his younger brother, Caleb, were playing hide-and-seek in their grandmother's house. The place was old, crammed with antiques, and smelled faintly of dust and lavender. Every room seemed to contain a mirror, Tall, freestanding ones in the bedrooms, gilded ones in the hallways, small oval ones in the kitchen. Ethan had never paid much attention to them before, but that day, something felt different. He was counting loudly in the living room while Caleb scampered off to hide. The rain drummed steadily against the windows, and the old grandfather clock ticked with a slow, heavy beat. When he reached 10, Ethan opened his eyes and turned toward the hallway. "Ready or not, here I come," he shouted. He moved cautiously through the house, peeking behind doors and under tables. Caleb was small, wiry, and clever. He had a knack for squeezing himself into the tightest, most unlikely spaces. Ethan checked the coat closet, the pantry, even behind the curtains. No Caleb. It wasn't until he passed the tall hallway mirror that something caught his eye. In the glass, he saw himself, but he also saw Caleb. His little brother stood just behind him in the reflection, grinning mischievously. Ethan spun around, expecting to catch him giggling in the hall, but the hallway was empty. A cold ripple spread down his spine. Slowly, he turned back to the mirror. There, clear as day, was Caleb, peeking around his shoulder in the reflection. His grin widened. "Got you!" Ethan cried, lunging toward the space where Caleb should have been. His hands closed on empty air. The mirror, however, told a different story. In its depths, Caleb had darted away, scampering toward the kitchen with a laugh. Ethan froze. His real ears heard only silence. No footsteps, no laughter. Just the quiet ticking of the clock. That was the first time Ethan realized his brother had a reflection that didn't always match reality. At first, he thought it was some strange trick of his imagination. But it kept happening. Whenever they played, Ethan noticed odd discrepancies in the mirrors. He might see Caleb crouched under the dining room table in the reflection, only to find the space empty when he bent down to check. Or he would see Caleb standing in the bathroom doorway in the glass, even while the real Caleb was upstairs. It unsettled him, but he said nothing. He was a child, and children doubt their own senses all the time. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the mirrors were showing him a version of Caleb that didn't belong. One night, while brushing his teeth, Ethan glanced up and saw Caleb standing behind him in the bathroom mirror. He wasn't moving, just staring, his face expressionless. Ethan spat out his toothpaste, turned, and found the bathroom empty. His parents had already tucked Caleb into bed. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. The encounters grew stranger as the weeks passed. Sometimes, Caleb's reflection moved differently than Caleb himself. Ethan would wave his hand, and Caleb's reflection would wave back with a beat too slow, as though lagging behind. Other times, the reflection would smile when Caleb wasn't smiling, or worse, frown when Caleb was laughing. One evening, Ethan tried to test it. He brought Caleb into the hallway mirror and made a game of it. "Let's both wave at the same time," Ethan instructed. Caleb giggled, raising his small hand. Ethan raised his. Their reflections did the same. For a moment, everything was normal. Then, as Ethan lowered his hand, Caleb's reflection kept waving. Slowly, deliberately, the grin stretching wider, unnaturally wide. Caleb noticed it too. His laughter died in his throat, and his hand fell limply to his side. "Ethan," he whispered. "Why is it still waving?" Ethan grabbed his brother and yanked him away from the mirror, heart pounding. He didn't have an answer. He tried telling his parents once, but they dismissed it. "You have a vivid imagination," his father said, ruffling his hair. "Mirrors just play tricks on the eyes. Don't scare your brother with silly stories." But Ethan wasn't imagining things. He could feel it, deep in his bones. Something was wrong with Caleb's reflection. It all came to a head one stormy Saturday night. Their parents had gone out to dinner, leaving the boys with their grandmother. The rain hammered the roof, thunder shaking the house. Power flickered once, twice, before plunging the rooms into darkness. "Stay close," Grandma instructed, fumbling for candles. Ethan held Caleb's hand tightly as the old woman shuffled into the kitchen. Lightning flashed, illuminating the long hallway mirror. In that split second of white light, Ethan saw them, himself, holding Caleb's hand. But Caleb's reflection wasn't looking at him. It was looking directly at Ethan's reflection, smiling wickedly. Another flash of lightning. This time, Caleb's reflection was no longer holding his hand at all. It was pressed against the glass, palms flat, as though trying to push through. Ethan yanked his brother back, his scream catching in his throat. "Don't look at it," he cried, dragging Caleb toward the kitchen. But Caleb looked. He couldn't help himself. And when he did, he gasped, his small voice trembling. "Ethan, he looks like me." Ethan forced him into the kitchen where Grandma was lighting candles. He didn't explain. He didn't want to scare her, or himself, any more than he already was. That night, after the storm died and the power returned, Ethan woke to the sound of soft tapping. It echoed through the room, rhythmic and patient. Tap, tap, tap. He sat up in bed, heart hammering. Caleb was asleep in the other twin bed, his chest rising and falling steadily. The tapping came from the closet, from the mirror nailed to its inside door. Ethan slipped out of bed, bare feet cold on the floor. He crept closer, every step heavy with dread. The tapping continued, soft but insistent. Tap, tap, tap. He reached the closet door and, with trembling fingers, pulled it open. The mirror stared back at him. His own reflection blinked nervously. Caleb's reflection, however, was awake, wide awake, sitting upright in bed, eyes gleaming in the darkness. Ethan whirled around. His real brother was still fast asleep. He looked back at the mirror. Caleb's reflection tilted its head, grinning. Then it raised its hand and tapped the glass 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. Ethan slammed the door shut and stumbled back into bed, pulling the blankets over his head. He didn't sleep at all. After that, things escalated. Caleb began to change. At first, it was subtle. He seemed distracted, staring at mirrors longer than usual. Then, he began talking to them. Ethan would catch him in the hallway, whispering to his own reflection. When asked, Caleb only shrugged. "He's nice," he said once, eyes distant. "He says I can come live with him." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Don't listen to him," he snapped. "He's not you. He's not real." But Caleb only smiled faintly. The final night came without warning. Ethan woke to a sound like shattering glass. Heart racing, he sat up to see Caleb standing barefoot by the closet, the mirror inside cracked and splintered. "Caleb," Ethan hissed, "what are you doing?" His brother turned slowly. The moonlight spilling through the window illuminated his face, and Ethan's stomach dropped. It wasn't Caleb. Not really. The smile was too wide, the eyes too hollow, the face too sharp, as though stretched thin over something else entirely. "Ethan," the thing said softly, "come with us." Ethan stumbled out of bed, pressing himself against the far wall. "You're not him," he shouted. "You're not my brother." The thing cocked its head. Behind it, the mirror rippled like water, its fractured surface opening into darkness. Ethan swore he saw hands reaching out, clawing, pulling. The real Caleb sat up in bed, eyes glazed, as though in a trance. He began to rise, moving toward the mirror. "No!" Ethan screamed, lunging forward. He grabbed his brother, pulling with all his strength as the thing in the mirror reached through, its cold fingers brushing Ethan's arm. The room filled with a deafening roar, like wind howling through a tunnel. The mirror shuddered violently. For one terrible moment, Ethan thought it would pull them both in. With a final desperate yank, he dragged Caleb away. The mirror let out a sound like a dying scream before exploding into shards. Glass rained across the floor, glittering in the moonlight. When the dust settled, the reflection was gone. Only their own wide-eyed faces stared back at them in the remaining fragments. The Taylors moved out of the grandmother's house soon after. The mirrors were covered, then taken away. Caleb never spoke of his friend again, though sometimes Ethan caught him staring at windows, eyes distant, as if waiting for something. Years passed. Ethan grew older, but the memory never left him. He couldn't stand mirrors anymore. He avoided them whenever possible. Because sometimes, even now, when he dared to glance at one, he swore he saw Caleb's reflection smiling just a little too widely. When Emily was 5 years old, she told her parents she had a new sister. Her mother, Karen, smiled indulgently, glancing over at her husband as they tucked Emily into bed. "That's sweet, honey," she said, brushing the child's blonde hair from her forehead. "But you don't have a sister. It's just you." Emily frowned, small brows furrowing. "No, Mommy. She sleeps here, on the floor. She says she's my sister." Karen felt a ripple of unease, but forced a smile. "Well, what's her name?" Emily shook her head. "She won't tell me yet. She just laughs." Karen kissed her good night, dismissing it as the harmless invention of a lonely child. Many kids had imaginary friends, after all, but in the weeks that followed, the sister became a constant presence in Emily's life. She talked to her during the day, whispering secrets under her breath. She left space at the table, nudging her milk toward the empty chair beside her. At night, Karen sometimes heard her giggling softly, as though someone were telling her jokes. "She's funny," Emily said once, "but she doesn't like you and Daddy very much." That made Karen's smile falter. At first, the parents humored her, even setting an extra plate at dinner when Emily insisted, but small things began to disturb them. Emily's toys would be moved in the night, arranged into strange patterns on the floor. Dolls sat in perfect rows, all facing the bed. Blocks spelled out words no 5-year-old could manage. And then there were the drawings. One afternoon, Karen found Emily hunched over her crayons, tongue sticking out in concentration. The paper showed 2 little girls, Emily with her blonde pigtails, and another girl beside her. The second child had the same clothes, the same hair, the same face, except for the red scribbles around her neck. Karen's stomach dropped. "Emily, why did you draw her like that?" Emily looked up with innocent eyes. "That's my sister. That's how she looks." Things worsened quickly. Emily began waking up crying in the night, saying her sister was angry. "She says it hurts," Emily sobbed, clutching her blanket. "She says you can't hear her, but I can." Her father, David, tried to soothe her. "Sweetheart, it's just a dream. There's no one else here." But Emily shook her head violently. "Yes, there is. She sleeps under the bed. She says I'm not allowed to tell you, but she's real." From that night on, Karen refused to let her daughter sleep alone. She sat by her bed until Emily drifted off, but even then, she felt the weight of unseen eyes in the dark. One evening, after a particularly restless day, Emily whispered something that chilled her mother to the bone. She told me she was supposed to be born too, but she didn't make it. Karen's breath caught. She hadn't told Emily that when she was pregnant, the doctors had once thought she was carrying twins. The second heartbeat had vanished after a few weeks. She and David had buried the grief quietly, never speaking of it again. "Who told you that?" Karen whispered, her voice shaking. Emily only pointed at the empty side of the room. The house itself began to change. Cold spots lingered in corners, and shadows flickered at the edge of vision. Karen would sometimes wake to the sound of faint crying, only to find Emily sleeping peacefully beside her. One night, as David worked late, Karen sat on the couch, folding laundry. She glanced up and froze. Emily was standing in the hallway, half hidden in shadow. "Sweetie," Karen called, "why are you up?" But Emily didn't answer. She just stared at her mother, eyes flat, expression blank. Slowly, she tilted her head to one side, a grotesque angle too far for a child's neck, Karen's heart stopped. She dropped the clothes and bolted toward the hallway, only to find it empty. Emily was sound asleep in her room. The imaginary sister grew bolder. Emily's once bright personality dulled, her laughter fading. She became withdrawn, whispering constantly to someone unseen. Her skin grew pale, dark circles hollowing her eyes. "She wants me to go with her," Emily confessed one night, voice trembling. "She says I can stay with her forever." Karen clutched her daughter tightly, tears spilling. "No, Emily, don't listen. You stay here with Mommy and Daddy." But Emily only shook her head. "She says I don't get to choose." One evening, Karen decided she had to put an end to it. Armed with every ounce of maternal determination, she stood in Emily's room after tucking her in. "I don't know who you are," she whispered into the darkness. "But you cannot have my daughter. You don't belong here." The room fell silent. Then, faintly, a laugh trickled from under the bed. High, childlike, mocking. Karen dropped to her knees, peering into the shadows. For an instant, she swore she saw eyes staring back, bright and cold, a mirror of Emily's. She scrambled back, heart pounding, and slammed the door shut. The breaking point came weeks later. David awoke in the middle of the night to a strange sound, a low, choking gasp. He turned to see Emily standing at the foot of their bed. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. "She says it's my turn now," Emily whispered. Before they could move, she collapsed to the floor, convulsing violently. Karen screamed, rushing to her side. Emily's small body arched and twisted, her mouth opening in a silent scream. For a terrible moment, her eyes rolled back, and a second voice, a child's voice, but not hers, spoke through her. "You took my life, now she gives me hers." The air in the room dropped to freezing. The lights flickered, shadows twisted along the walls, forming the faint outline of a girl crouched beside Emily's body. Karen clutched her daughter, sobbing. "No, take me instead. Leave her alone." The voice laughed, cold and cruel. "She's mine." And then, as suddenly as it began, the fit stopped. Emily went limp, her small chest heaving as she gasped for air. When her eyes fluttered open, they were her own again. She clung to her mother, trembling, whispering, "She's gone. She says she's coming back, but she's gone." The family left the house within days. They never returned, abandoning Emily's toys, clothes, even furniture behind. Years later, when Emily was a teenager, she told her mother she barely remembered the ordeal, but sometimes, in the dead of night, she would wake with the sensation of fingers brushing her throat, and in the mirror above her dresser, she would catch fleeting glimpses of a girl who looked exactly like her, smiling with blood around her neck. Olivia Reed had always been half of something, half of a laugh, half of a secret, half of a plan whispered between two heads bent close together. She and her twin brother, Nathan, were inseparable. Growing up in a quiet New England town, the pair were so identical that teachers often confused them, even though one was a boy and the other a girl. They shared the same sharp jawline, the same wide gray eyes, the same crooked smile that lit up their faces when they were together. But Nathan was gone now. It had been a car accident on a rain-slick highway when they were 22. One moment, Olivia had been laughing at something he said, his voice filling the car with warmth. The next, everything was twisted metal and shattering glass. She woke in the hospital with broken ribs and stitches in her scalp. Nathan didn't wake at all. After the funeral, Olivia returned alone to the small apartment they'd shared. His side of the bedroom was empty, his shoes neatly lined by the door, his toothbrush still in the holder. The silence pressed down on her like a weight. For the first time in her life, she was no longer half of anything. At least, that's what she thought. The footsteps began a week later. It was late at night, the city quiet outside, when Olivia heard them. She was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when the creak of the floorboards made her sit up. Slow, heavy steps echoed down the hallway, the sound she knew by heart. Her twin's gait, always a little uneven from an old sprained ankle. Her breath caught in her throat. She flung back the covers, heart hammering. "Nathan," she whispered. No answer. Only the steady thud of footsteps approaching her door. She froze, trembling as the sound reached the threshold. Then, silence. When she found the courage to flick on the lamp, the hallway was empty. It happened again the next night. And the night after that. Always the same, the unmistakable rhythm of Nathan's steps moving down the hall, stopping just outside her room. Sometimes she swore she heard him shift his weight, the floorboards groaning under phantom pressure. Once she even smelled his cologne, citrusy, sharp, lingering in the air, until her eyes filled with tears. She told herself it was grief. Her mind was playing cruel tricks, filling in the silence with echoes of him. But deep down, she wasn't sure. She knew Nathan's footsteps better than her own. They'd walked side by side for 22 years, and now they were walking again. One night she tried speaking to him. "I know it's you," she whispered into the darkness. "I can hear you. If you're still here, please let me know." The room was silent. Then came a single, deliberate step forward. Olivia's chest constricted. Tears streamed down her face as she choked out, "I miss you." For the first time since his death, she felt something warm brush against her hand, as though fingers had closed gently around hers. But when she reached out, the air was empty. The footsteps grew bolder. Soon, they followed her through the apartment. She would walk into the kitchen and hear the echo of another set of feet behind her, perfectly in sync. She would wash dishes and feel the faint vibration of weight shifting on the tiles beside her. One evening, she was brushing her teeth when she saw it, a faint shadow in the mirror. Nathan's shape, standing just behind her shoulder. She spun around, but the bathroom was empty. Her heart ached with longing, but a thread of fear wound through her too. Something about the presence felt heavier. Not quite the brother she remembered. The dreams began soon after. In them, Nathan stood at the foot of her bed. His eyes were dark hollows, his skin pale as wax. He never spoke, but his mouth opened and closed soundlessly, as though whispering words she couldn't hear. Every time she reached for him, he would step closer, and then she would wake with her sheets tangled, the imprint of weight pressed into the mattress beside her. Olivia confided in her mother one afternoon, hesitant but desperate for answers. Her mother went still, her coffee cup trembling in her hands. "When you and Nathan were babies," she admitted softly, "I used to hear the same thing. After you came home from the hospital, I'd hear footsteps in the nursery at night. But when I went in, no one was there. I thought I was just tired. But sometimes I wondered if it meant twins can't ever really be separated." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Olivia, maybe it's not Nathan you're hearing. Maybe it's what's left of him." The words chilled her. The following nights grew unbearable. The footsteps no longer stopped at her door. They entered. She would hear them pacing the room, circling her bed. She would lie, rigid under the covers, heart thundering as the boards creaked with every deliberate step. One night, the weight dipped the mattress. A cold hand brushed her hair. She couldn't hold back the sob. "Nathan, please, if it's you, please stop. You're scaring me." The footsteps stilled. Then close to her ear, she heard a whisper. "Not Nathan." Her blood ran cold. After that, Olivia avoided the apartment as much as she could. She stayed late at work, crashed on friends' couches, wandered the streets at night, but exhaustion always drove her back, and each time she returned, the footsteps were waiting. One night, desperate, she scattered flour across the hallway floor before going to bed. Her hands shook as she spread the white powder, hoping for proof she was losing her mind. She lay awake until the familiar creak began. The footsteps approached, slow and steady, each one making her heart race faster. They stopped outside her door, lingered, then retreated back down the hall. When she finally gathered the courage to look, her breath caught. There were footprints in the flour, bare feet, large, wider than Nathan's had ever been, and they stopped at her bedroom door. Sleep became impossible. Olivia's body ached, her mind frayed with exhaustion. She began seeing shadows move during the day, hearing faint echoes even in the noise of traffic outside. One night, she dreamed again. Nathan stood at the foot of her bed, his expression twisted with anguish. This time she heard the words, "Not me. Run!" She woke to footsteps pounding toward her room, faster than ever before. The door creaked open on its own. The air grew icy, her breath visible in the dark. Something entered. The mattress dipped beside her, heavier than before, and then a second set of footsteps echoed across the ceiling, above her, upside down, as though something crawled along it, circling her bed from above. She couldn't scream. She couldn't move. And then 2 voices whispered in unison, one her brother's, one not. "You're mine now." By morning, neighbors heard nothing but silence. The apartment door was locked from the inside. When her mother came by days later, frantic after Olivia stopped answering calls, she found the apartment empty. The only sign of her daughter was a single pair of footprints in the hallway floor, Olivia's, joined halfway by another set. 2 sets side by side, walking together toward the bedroom. And then nothing. Laura Stevens had always loved the sound of her son's laughter. 2-year-old Ben had a bright, bubbling giggle that filled the house with warmth. It was a sound Laura clung to, especially after the loss of her first child, Michael, 3 years earlier. Michael had been 6 years old when he drowned in a neighbor's pool. The tragedy shattered Laura's world. For months, she lived in a haze of grief, drifting through her days like a ghost. But when Ben was born, she felt a piece of herself heal. He was not a replacement, never, but he brought life back into a house that had grown so unbearably quiet. Still, there were nights when Laura lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the memory of her first son's voice. That was why, when she first heard it again, she thought she was losing her mind. It was just past midnight, and the baby monitor on her nightstand crackled to life. Laura stirred groggily, expecting to hear Ben fussing in his crib. Instead, she heard laughter. Not Ben's soft toddler giggle. Michael's. Laura sat upright, heart slamming against her ribs. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The laughter was unmistakable. Higher, older, the sound of her 6-year-old son who had been gone for years. She stumbled out of bed, rushing down the hall to Ben's room. The sight nearly undid her. Ben was sitting up in his crib, smiling and clapping his hands, as if someone had just told him a joke. His wide eyes were fixed on the corner of the room, where the shadows seemed deeper. "Sweetheart," Laura whispered, scooping him up. Her hands trembled. "What's so funny?" Ben only pointed to the corner. "Mikey." Laura's stomach dropped. The next morning, she told her husband, Mark, what had happened. He frowned, sipping his coffee. "Laura, you were half asleep. The monitor picks up interference all the time. Neighbors' phones, radios. You probably just imagined it." "I know my son's laugh," Laura snapped. Her voice cracked and she quickly looked away. "It was Michael." Mark softened, taking her hand. "You've been under a lot of stress. You miss him. Maybe your mind is filling in the silence." But Laura knew it wasn't her imagination. She couldn't shake the sound of Michael's laughter echoing through the static. Over the following nights, the monitor grew stranger. Sometimes she heard whispers, soft, quick, like children confiding in each other. Other times, she heard footsteps in Ben's room, slow and deliberate, though when she opened the door, there was never anyone there. Ben seemed delighted. He would babble and laugh in the darkness, reaching out toward the air as though someone were playing with him. One night, Laura crept to his door and listened. Through the monitor, she heard two voices. Ben's, high and sweet, and another voice, older, Michael's. "Play," the voice urged. "Play," Ben echoed, clapping. Laura's knees nearly buckled. She tried to record it. The next evening, she set her phone beside the monitor, hit record, and waited. At 1:13 a.m., the voices began again. She heard Michael's unmistakable tone, clear as if he were in the room. Her heart pounded as she leaned close, desperate not to miss a word. But when she played back the recording in the morning, it was nothing but static. Her hands shook as she replayed it again and again. Nothing. And yet, when she leaned over Ben's crib, the faint scent of chlorine tickled her nose. Sharp and chemical, the smell of pool water. Ben began talking about his big brother. At breakfast, he pushed his eggs aside and said, "Mikey doesn't like eggs. He wants cereal." Laura's blood ran cold. She had never spoken Michael's nickname aloud to him. Another time, she found Ben stacking blocks into a lopsided tower. He looked up proudly and announced, "Mikey helped." "Sweetheart," Laura whispered, kneeling. "Where is Mikey?" Ben pointed toward the monitor, where its red light blinked steadily. Mark grew frustrated. "You're feeding into this," he said one night after Laura insisted they switch off the monitor. "You're letting grief twist your mind, and now you're dragging Ben into it." "I'm not dragging him into anything," Laura shot back. "He knows things he shouldn't know. He's talking to someone in that room, Mark, and I know who it is." Mark rubbed his temples, exhausted. Even if it were Michael, why would you want that? He's gone. He should stay gone." Tears blurred her vision. "Because he was my son, and I never got to say goodbye." That night, Laura left the monitor on her pillow and tried to sleep. At 2 a.m., a new sound jolted her awake. Not laughter, not whispers. Crying. Michael's crying. Her body went rigid. The sound was raw, desperate. The same gut-wrenching sob she'd heard the day he slipped beneath the water. "No," Laura whispered, clutching the monitor. "No, please." Through the static, a voice choked out, "Mommy, help me." She bolted from the bed, racing to Ben's room. He was standing in his crib, screaming, tiny hands reaching upward. His eyes were wide with terror, fixed on something Laura couldn't see. "It's okay, baby," she sobbed, scooping him into her arms. But when she turned toward the door, a shape flickered in the corner of her vision. A small boy, dripping wet, hair plastered to his forehead, skin pale as moonlight. Michael. After that night, Laura refused to leave Ben alone. She carried him from room to room, letting him nap in her arms. But she couldn't escape the feeling that Michael was always near. Reflections wavered in the windows. Sometimes she saw a second child standing beside Ben, smiling faintly. The scent of chlorine lingered in the halls, and the monitor never stayed quiet. "Come play," the voice urged one night. "Come with me." Ben giggled, nodding. "Okay, Mikey." "No," Laura cried, lunging to shut off the monitor. Her hands shook violently. "You can't have him." The static hissed back at her, almost like a laugh. The final night came in late summer. Laura dozed fitfully with Ben curled beside her when the monitor flared to life, louder than ever before. Both voices rang clear, Michael's and Ben's, laughing, shouting, calling out. Laura sat bolt upright. But when she looked at the monitor, the tiny green screen didn't show Ben's crib. It showed water, dark, rippling water, stretching endlessly. And in it, two small boys holding hands, their faces pale in the glow. Her scream tore through the house. She ripped the monitor from the outlet, hurling it against the wall. The screen shattered, sparks flying. When she looked back at the bed, Ben was gone. Panic exploded through her chest. She tore through the house, shrieking his name, checking every corner, every room. Nothing. And then, faintly, from the broken monitor on the floor, she heard his giggle. "Mikey." Her heart cracked. The police never found him. There was no forced entry, no sign of a struggle. The windows were locked, the doors bolted from the inside. Laura insisted she'd seen Michael, that her drowned son had returned to take his brother. Mark dismissed her as hysterical, and in time he left, unable to endure the house or her grief. But Laura never stopped listening. Every night she sits in the dark with a new monitor by her bed, waiting. Sometimes, through the static, she hears two voices laughing together, and sometimes, just for a moment, she hears Michael whisper, "Mommy, we're waiting." When the Thompson family moved into the Victorian house on Elmwood Lane, it felt like the fresh start they desperately needed. The marriage had been strained, the kids restless, and money tight. The sprawling old house, with its gabled roof and creaking porch, was far cheaper than anything else they'd toured. The realtor brushed it off with a smile, saying the house had a bit of history, but nothing to worry about. Laura Thompson fell in love with the high ceilings and stained glass windows. Her husband, David, admired the solid oak beams and the enormous fireplace. Their two children, Emily and Jacob, ran through the halls with wild laughter, thrilled at the size of their new playground. But not every room welcomed them. At the end of the upstairs hallway stood a single, locked door. It was painted the same color as the others, but the brass knob was tarnished, and no matter how David twisted it, the door would not budge. "Storage," the realtor explained quickly when Laura asked. "Just an old utility closet. Nothing useful in there. The previous owners sealed it years ago." Her explanation didn't satisfy them, but in the excitement of moving, the locked room became a curiosity rather than a concern. There were plenty of other rooms to settle into, after all. For a while, the family thrived. The first oddity came from Emily. She was 7 years old, bright and imaginative, prone to inventing stories. One night at dinner, she announced casually, "The boy in the locked room says he wants to play with me." Laura nearly dropped her fork. "What boy, sweetheart?" Emily shrugged, spooning peas into her mouth. "The one in the room at the end of the hall. He talks to me when I walk by." David chuckled nervously. "You've just got a big imagination. There's no one in there." But Laura noticed the way Emily's eyes darted to the ceiling as if she were listening for something. It wasn't just Emily. Jacob, only 4, began waking at night, wailing that the man was knocking again. When Laura pressed him, he pointed toward the locked room. Sometimes, late at night, Laura swore she heard it too. A faint rapping, irregular, like fingers tapping against wood. Other times, a low thud, as if something heavy had fallen inside. When she asked David about it, he dismissed her worries. "Old houses make noise," he said. "It's probably pipes or rats." But Laura couldn't shake the unease that settled in her chest. A week later, the tapping grew louder. One night, Laura lingered in the hall after putting the children to bed. The house was silent, the lights dim. As she passed the locked door, she heard it, a deliberate knock. 3 times. Her breath caught. She stood frozen, staring at the knob. The air grew heavy, pressing down on her lungs. "Hello," she whispered, her voice trembling. Silence. Then, slowly, the knob began to turn, just a fraction, as though someone inside had tried to open it. Laura stumbled back, nearly tripping over her own feet. She rushed to the bedroom, shaking David awake. When he checked the door minutes later, the hallway was quiet, the knob still. The children grew more disturbed. Emily began leaving toys outside the locked room, carefully arranging them in neat rows. When Laura asked why, Emily replied matter-of-factly, "So the boy won't be lonely." One morning, Laura found the toys scattered down the hall, broken apart as if stomped on. Emily swore she hadn't touched them. Jacob, meanwhile, refused to walk past the door at all. He would beg to be carried, crying that the man was watching him through the cracks. "There aren't any cracks," David muttered in frustration, jiggling the immovable knob. "This is ridiculous." But Laura knew her children weren't liars. That night, Laura dreamed of the room. In the dream, she stood in front of the locked door, the knob gleaming. Slowly, it turned under her hand. The door swung open, and darkness swallowed her whole. From inside came a voice, high, sing-song, almost playful. "Let me out." She woke drenched in sweat, the echo of the words still in her ears. The following evening, Laura tried to investigate. While David was at work, she brought a hammer and chisel to the door, determined to pry it open. She struck at the hinges until her arms ached, but the metal didn't budge. She tried forcing the lock with a screwdriver, but the tool snapped in half. It was as if the house itself was guarding the room. Frustrated, she pressed her ear against the wood. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then came a whisper, soft and close. "Hello, Laura." Her blood ran cold. She hadn't told the children her first name. That night, the family gathered in the living room, the atmosphere tense. "We're leaving," Laura insisted. "Something is wrong with that room. I don't care how much we paid for this house. I won't risk the kids." David pinched the bridge of his nose. "We can't just walk away. We put everything into this place." Before Laura could argue, the sound cut through the house, a violent, pounding knock from upstairs. 1, 2, 3. The children screamed. Laura grabbed them, clutching them to her chest. David, pale and shaking, bolted for the stairs, determined to confront whatever was inside. She followed close behind, her heart hammering. The hallway was alive with sound, the door rattling, the knob twisting violently. Dust rained from the ceiling as the frame shook, as though something inside were throwing itself against the walls. David raised his hammer, ready to smash the door down. "Don't!" Laura screamed, grabbing his arm. But it was too late. With a deafening crack, the lock split and the door swung open. The room beyond was small, windowless, the walls stained and peeling. In the center sat a tiny iron bed frame, its mattress rotting. Shackles dangled from the posts. The air reeked of mildew and something fouler, decay, old and bitter. And in the far corner stood a figure. A boy, no older than 10, his skin ashen, his eyes sunken black pits. Chains clinked as he stepped forward, lips curling into a smile too wide for his face. "Thank you," he whispered. The children wailed. Laura shoved them behind her, screaming for David to close the door, but the boy moved fast, darting into the hallway with unnatural speed. The lights flickered, the air turning icy. Shadows spilled from his form, stretching along the walls like grasping hands. For hours, the house was chaos. Doors slammed on their own, windows shattered, objects hurled across rooms. The children cowered in their parents' arms as the entity raged, shrieking in a voice that was both childlike and monstrous. "Trapped for so long," it hissed. "Now we can play." By dawn, the house was silent again. But the locked room was no longer empty. On the bed sat 2 new shackles, small enough to fit a child's wrists. The Thompsons fled that morning, leaving everything behind. The house was boarded up, sold off again and again, each new family staying only briefly. No one could live with the sounds. At night, the knocking always returned, and sometimes, if you pressed your ear to the wood, you would hear children crying inside. Megan and Lily were twins, identical in every way, except temperament. At 11 years old, they were inseparable, though Megan was bold and mischievous, while Lily was cautious and soft-spoken. Where Megan loved pranks and dares, Lily loved books and quiet afternoons in their shared bedroom. One rainy Saturday, while rummaging through the dusty attic, Megan discovered an old handheld mirror tucked inside a cracked wooden chest. Its frame was ornate, curling in strange shapes that looked more like claws than decoration. The glass itself was oddly clear, almost too perfect, as if it had never gathered a single speck of dust. "Check it out," Megan said, holding it up to the light. "It looks magical." Lily frowned. "It looks creepy." That was all the encouragement Megan needed. That evening, as thunder rolled across the sky, Megan insisted on a new game she invented. The reflection game. The rules were simple, she explained. Both girls would sit in front of the mirror at midnight, lights off except for a single candle. They would stare into the glass, without blinking, without speaking, until one of their reflections moved on its own. Whoever looked away first lost. Lily shivered. "What happens if the reflection moves?" Megan grinned wickedly. "Then it tells you a secret." Lily wanted no part of it, but Megan was relentless. She teased her sister for being afraid, called her a baby, and finally coaxed her with a promise. If Lily played, Megan would do her chores for a week. Reluctantly, Lily agreed. At midnight, the twins sat cross-legged on the floor with the mirror propped between them, the single candle flickering shadows across the room. Rain drummed against the window. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Their reflections stared back, eerily identical except for the nervous twitch of Lily's lip. Then the candle guttered, and the flame bent sideways as if caught in a breeze. Lily gasped. Megan hissed at her to stay still. In the mirror, the reflections did not gasp. They did not even blink. Both girls froze. Megan leaned forward, breath fogging the glass. "Did you see that?" she whispered. This time, their reflections didn't copy her. Instead, both mirror girls smiled. A slow, deliberate stretch of lips, far wider than Megan or Lily had moved. The twins screamed, knocking the mirror over. The candle went out, plunging the room into darkness. When they scrambled to switch on the light, the mirror lay face down on the carpet, its frame unbroken. When Megan lifted it cautiously, their reflections stared back normally, wide-eyed and terrified, just like them. "Game over," Lily whispered. "We're never playing that again." But Megan, heart racing with exhilaration, only smirked. "Tomorrow night, we'll try again." The next night, Megan played alone. Lily refused, burying herself under the covers with her pillow over her ears. At midnight, Megan lit the candle and set the mirror upright. She sat cross-legged and stared, determined not to look away. Minutes passed. Her eyes burned from not blinking. Then, slowly, her reflection tilted its head to the side. Megan hadn't moved. The reflection's lips parted, and though the glass was silent, words seemed to form. "Let me out." A shiver ran down her spine. She whispered aloud, "Out of where?" Her reflection's mouth curled into a grin. "Switch places." The candle flickered violently, then extinguished. The room was swallowed by blackness. When Megan relit the candle seconds later, the mirror was blank. No reflection at all. The following morning, Lily noticed something strange. Megan was quiet. Too quiet. Her usual teasing, her boundless energy, it was gone. She barely touched her cereal, staring instead at the mirror propped on the dresser. "You okay?" Lily asked, hesitant. Megan's eyes flicked toward her. Her smile looked wrong, stiff and unnatural. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice sounded different. Lower, flatter. Lily's stomach tightened. She tried to convince herself it was her imagination, until that night when she caught Megan whispering to the mirror. The whispers grew more frequent. Sometimes, Lily woke in the middle of the night to see Megan kneeling in front of the mirror, candle burning low, her lips moving soundlessly. Other times, she found her sister staring into the glass during the day, eyes glazed as if she were listening to someone else speak. When Lily begged her to stop, Megan snapped with uncharacteristic fury. "You're just jealous. They like me better." "They," Lily echoed, terrified. Megan only smiled. One evening, Lily worked up the courage to look into the mirror herself. The moment her eyes met the glass, she froze. Her reflection was not alone. Behind her own mirrored image stood Megan, except Megan was asleep on the bed across the room. The reflection, Megan grinned, her teeth impossibly sharp, her eyes black voids. She raised a finger to her lips in a shushing gesture. Lily screamed, hurling the mirror across the room. The glass didn't shatter. Instead, it landed upright against the wall facing the bed. Megan stirred, opened her eyes, and whispered, "Now you've made them angry." The house changed after that. Mirrors warped their reflections. Sometimes Lily would see herself with a twisted smile she hadn't made, or find her reflection moving a second too late. Once, in the bathroom, she turned to grab her toothbrush and caught her reflection still staring at her, grinning wide. Megan grew stranger by the day. She stopped eating with the family, stopped going outside. She spent hours locked in their room with the mirror, murmuring to it. When Lily begged their parents to take it away, they only dismissed her. "She's just playing pretend." But Lily knew better. Her sister wasn't Megan anymore. The final game began on a stormy night, a week after they'd found the mirror. Lily woke to the sound of Megan's voice, low and chanting. She sat up to see her twin kneeling before the mirror again, candlelight casting monstrous shadows across her face. "Megan, stop," Lily whispered. Megan turned and Lily's breath caught. Her sister's eyes were pitch black, her smile stretched unnaturally wide. "It's your turn," Megan said, voice distorted. "They want you." "No," Lily choked. "I'm not playing." But Megan lunged, stronger than she'd ever been, grabbing Lily's wrist and dragging her toward the mirror. The glass rippled like water as they drew near. Lily fought, kicking and screaming, but Megan's grip was iron. She shoved her twin's face toward the mirror, forcing her to look. Lily's reflection blinked, out of sync. Its mouth opened, whispering soundlessly. "Switch." The glass rippled, and Lily felt a terrible pull, like hands reaching from inside, dragging her forward. She shrieked, clawing at the floor, but Megan's strength was unstoppable. With one final shove, Lily fell into the mirror, and the glass went still. The next morning, Mrs. Thompson came to wake the girls. Megan sat calmly on the bed, brushing her hair. "Where's your sister?" their mother asked. Megan smiled, tilting her head toward the mirror on the dresser. "She's right here." Her mother laughed, assuming it was a game, and left the room. But inside the glass, Lily pounded her fists against the surface, screaming. Her reflection showed nothing but a placid smile. And Megan, her real Megan, whispered back through the mirror, her voice echoing faintly in the glass. "We're together now." The mirror still sits in that attic today, waiting for another curious child to play. And if you stare long enough, sometimes you'll see two little girls standing just behind you. When Daniel and Marcus were little, they shared everything: clothes, toys, secrets. As brothers only a year apart, their bond was unbreakable. At least, it had been once. But after their family moved into the old farmhouse at the edge of town, something changed between them, something that whispered only at night. The farmhouse was massive, creaky and remote. Their parents called it charming, but the boys found it unsettling. The rooms smelled faintly of mildew, the wallpaper peeled in long curling strips, and the wind seemed to speak as it whistled through the cracks in the windows. The worst part, however, was the attic. Their bedroom was just below it, and every night they heard faint noises above. The scrape of something dragging, the shuffle of slow footsteps. Their father insisted it was just mice, but Daniel wasn't convinced. Neither was Marcus. The first night it happened, Daniel woke to the sound of whispering. It was faint, almost drowned by the wind, but distinct. Voices, low, urgent, hissing through the still air. He sat up, straining to listen. Across the room, Marcus was asleep, turned toward the wall. The whispers seemed to be coming from above, filtering down from the attic. Daniel padded over to his brother and shook him. "Do you hear that?" Marcus groaned. "Go to sleep." But Daniel swore he wasn't dreaming. The voices grew clearer the longer he listened. Come up and play." His blood ran cold. The next morning he told Marcus everything. "You probably dreamed it," Marcus muttered, but he avoided his brother's eyes. Daniel narrowed his gaze. "You've heard it too, haven't you?" Marcus didn't answer. That night they both lay awake, waiting. The house was silent except for the groan of settling wood. Hours passed. Daniel's eyelids grew heavy. Then, there it was again, a chorus of whispers slithering through the ceiling. Come up and play." This time, Marcus sat bolt upright. His face was pale in the moonlight. "You heard it," Daniel whispered. Marcus swallowed hard and nodded. For the next several nights, the whispers continued. Sometimes they came at midnight, sometimes just before dawn, always the same coaxing tone. The boys tried telling their parents, but their mother laughed and their father dismissed it as the house settling. They were alone with it. One night, Daniel couldn't resist. He climbed out of bed, determined to prove it wasn't just his imagination. Marcus grabbed his wrist, whispering frantically, "Don't go up there." But Daniel shook him off. The attic door was in the hallway just outside their room. It was an old wooden hatch with a rope pull. Daniel reached up, tugged it down, and the ladder unfolded with a creak. Cold air poured down, smelling of dust and something sour. The whispers grew louder. He climbed 3 steps before Marcus yanked him back. "Stop! You don't know what's up there." But Daniel was stubborn. "It's just some old homeless guy or something. We'll scare him off." Marcus shook his head violently. Those weren't human voices. Their argument woke their father, who stormed into the hallway and demanded to know what was going on. When they explained, he muttered angrily about overactive imaginations and shoved the ladder back up, slamming the hatch shut. But the voices didn't stop. If anything, they grew bolder. A week later, Marcus changed. He stopped playing outside with Daniel, stopped laughing at their inside jokes. He spent hours staring at the ceiling, lips moving soundlessly as if repeating words only he could hear. At night, Daniel noticed him sitting upright in bed, whispering back. When Daniel shook him, Marcus blinked slowly, confused, as though waking from a dream. "They just want to play," he murmured. Daniel's skin prickled. "Who?" But Marcus only smiled faintly. One stormy night, Daniel woke to find Marcus's bed empty. Panic surged through him. He ran into the hallway and froze. The attic hatch hung open. The ladder was down. "Marcus!" he hissed, but only silence answered. The whispers were louder than ever now, almost gleeful. Daniel climbed slowly, every rung groaning under his weight. The attic was pitch black, the air thick and cold. "Marcus?" No reply, but he saw movement in the corner. His brother crouched in the darkness, rocking back and forth. "Come down," Daniel whispered. Marcus's head snapped up. His eyes gleamed unnaturally in the dark. "They said I can stay," he whispered, voice not entirely his own. "They like me." Daniel scrambled down the ladder, heart racing, and slammed the hatch shut. Moments later, the ceiling above him reverberated with pounding fists. Something was trying to come down. But when their father checked the attic the next morning, it was empty. Marcus was back in bed as though nothing had happened, except his eyes were different, hollow. From then on, Marcus grew distant. He hardly spoke during the day, but at night Daniel heard him whispering to the ceiling. Sometimes he giggled softly, as if laughing at a private joke. One night, Daniel gathered his courage. He pressed his ear to the ceiling and listened. The whispers were clearer than ever. Dozens of voices, layered and hissing like snakes speaking in unison. "One is ours, the other will follow." Daniel stumbled back, shaking. They wanted him too. The final night began with silence. For the first time in weeks, Daniel didn't hear the whispers. Relieved, he drifted into uneasy sleep. But around 3 a.m., he woke to a weight on his chest. Marcus. His brother knelt over him, eyes black as coal, grinning wide. "They want you now," Marcus whispered. His voice was layered, as if a dozen others spoke with him. "It's your turn." Daniel screamed, shoving him off, but the room erupted in voices, shrieks, hisses, laughter. The ceiling split with a deafening crack, and shadows poured down like smoke, swirling into the room. Hands clawed at him, cold and skeletal, dragging him toward the open attic hatch. Marcus stood by, smiling. When their parents found the room the next morning, Daniel's bed was empty. The sheets were shredded, the window unbroken. Marcus sat calmly on his own bed, humming a lullaby. "Where's your brother?" their mother asked, panic in her voice. Marcus looked up, his eyes dull and lifeless. "He went to play," he said simply. And from the attic above, faintly came the sound of whispering. The farmhouse still stands, its attic untouched. Neighbors say if you pass by late at night, you can hear voices drifting from the rafters. Children's voices. Some claim to see a boy staring out from the highest window, his mouth moving silently, whispering words meant for someone just out of reach. Sophie and her younger brother Ethan had always shared a room. Their parents often said they'd grow out of it eventually, but for now, the siblings preferred the comfort of falling asleep together. The house was old, with windows that rattled in the wind and floors that creaked under every step. At night, when the rest of the world seemed silent, the two of them would whisper to each other until they drifted to sleep. But one night, in the middle of winter, Sophie noticed something strange. The moonlight spilled faintly through their bedroom window, lighting the room with a pale glow. Sophie stirred awake, rolling onto her side. That was when she noticed Ethan sitting upright in bed, staring toward the window with wide, glassy eyes. "What are you doing?" she whispered. Ethan didn't turn to look at her. His voice was hushed and steady, far too calm for a child his age. "There's a man outside," he said. Sophie jolted upright, her heart hammering. She followed his gaze to the window, but saw nothing beyond the frosted glass, only their faint reflections and the swaying branches of the oak tree in the yard. "There's nobody there," she whispered firmly, though unease prickled at her skin. Ethan shook his head. "He comes every night." The next morning, Sophie brushed it off as a bad dream. But that night, she woke again to find Ethan sitting up, staring at the window. This time, he whispered before she could even speak. "He's smiling at me." Sophie's blood ran cold. She forced herself to look, and for a fraction of a second she thought she saw it too. Something pale in the glass, a vague outline of a face just beyond the pane. But when she blinked, it was gone. "You're imagining it," she whispered harshly. "Stop scaring me." But Ethan didn't argue. He just kept staring, lips pressed into a thin line. Over the next week, Ethan grew quieter. He no longer played with his toys or laughed at Sophie's jokes. He spent most of his time at the window, staring outside with a vacant expression. One evening at dinner, their mother asked why he hadn't touched his food. Ethan finally looked away from the window and smiled faintly. "He says I don't need it anymore." Their father frowned. "Who says?" Ethan tilted his head, as if listening to a voice only he could hear. Then he whispered, "The man in the window." Their parents dismissed it as an overactive imagination, but Sophie felt a growing dread. She started staying awake at night, determined to catch this so-called man herself. On the third night of her vigil, she saw it. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the glass seemed to ripple. A pale face pressed against the window pane, features distorted as though the glass itself was too thin to contain it. The man was tall, with hollow eyes, and a mouth stretched into an unnatural grin that showed too many teeth. Sophie gasped and scrambled back, clutching her blanket. But when she looked again, the face was gone. Across the room, Ethan whispered, "See, I told you." The following days were a blur of fear. Sophie begged her parents to move her bed away from the window, but they brushed her off. "It's just the wind and shadows," her father insisted. But shadows didn't whisper. At night, Sophie began to hear it herself. Faint at first, like wind whistling through cracks. Then words, curling at the edges of her mind. "Let me in. Come closer. Just one step." She stuffed her ears with her pillow, but the whispers slithered through all the same. Then Ethan stopped sleeping in his bed. Sophie woke one night to find his blanket crumpled, the mattress empty. Panic seized her as she searched the room, only to find him standing in front of the window, forehead pressed to the cold glass. "Ethan!" she hissed, pulling him back. His skin was icy, his eyes unfocused. "He wants me to come outside," he murmured. Sophie dragged him back to bed, shaking him until he finally blinked awake, confused. But the next morning, he didn't remember a thing. The breaking point came a week later. Sophie woke to the sound of the window creaking open. Her heart pounded as she bolted upright. Ethan stood at the sill, pushing the glass upward with trembling hands. Outside, the night was still, and standing just beyond the oak tree was the man. Taller than she remembered, his pale figure stark against the darkness. He raised one long finger and beckoned. Sophie screamed, launching herself from bed. She grabbed Ethan's arm and yanked him back just as the window slid open fully, letting in a gust of freezing air. Ethan struggled against her grip, sobbing. "He said he'd take me home. He promised." But Sophie held on with all her strength until their parents rushed in. By the time the lights flicked on, the window was closed, the man gone, and Ethan trembling in her arms. After that, their parents nailed the window shut. They thought that would solve everything, but the man didn't need the window anymore. That very night, Sophie woke to the sound of whispering, but not outside. The voice was inside the room now, low and guttural. She turned slowly and froze. Ethan sat upright in bed, eyes pitch black, mouth moving in perfect unison with the voice. "She's next," Sophie screamed, and the lights flickered violently. When their parents rushed in, Ethan was asleep, breathing evenly, as though nothing had happened. But Sophie knew it was only the beginning. The days blurred into fear. Ethan wasted away, growing paler and thinner. He refused food, refused to speak to anyone but the window, even though it was nailed shut. One evening, Sophie overheard him, whispering in the corner, his voice barely audible. "They said they'll take her instead. They said she's stronger." Her blood froze. That night, Sophie dreamed of the man. He stood outside the window, grinning with rotting teeth. When he lifted his hand, she saw Ethan standing beside him, smiling too. She woke with a scream, only to find Ethan's bed empty again. She searched frantically, finally spotting him at the window, but this time the nails were bent, the wood splintered. The window was open. Cold air poured in, carrying with it the stench of decay. And outside, the man was waiting. He reached one impossibly long arm through the opening, fingers curling around Ethan's shoulders. Ethan's face lit with joy as he leaned forward, ready to climb out. Sophie lunged, grabbing him, pulling with all her might. The man's grip was icy, his claws digging into Ethan's skin. "No!" Sophie screamed. "You can't have him." The man's hollow eyes fixed on her. His grin widened. "Then you'll do." With a sudden force, his hand shot past Ethan, seizing Sophie's wrist. She felt her body go numb, her vision blurring as he began to pull her through the window. She clawed at the frame, at Ethan, at anything she could grab. Her screams filled the night. And then, silence. When their parents burst in, the window was wide open, the icy wind howling through the room. Ethan sat calmly on the floor, staring out into the dark. "Sophie's gone," he said softly. His mother dropped to her knees, sobbing while his father ran into the yard, searching desperately. But Sophie was never found. Ethan only smiled faintly. He took her instead. Years later, neighbors still whisper about the house. They say that if you walk past on a moonlit night, you can see a pale face in the upstairs window, a girl's face, eyes wide with terror, mouth open in a silent scream. And sometimes, just behind her, the shadow of a man grinning through the glass. Sleepovers had always been the highlight of Emma and Lily's childhood. The two sisters, only 2 years apart, loved staying up past midnight, whispering secrets and telling each other ghost stories until they drifted into dreams. Their parents usually let them share the living room on those nights, setting up blankets and pillows in a messy fort they called the cave. It was cozy, safe, filled with laughter. But their last sleepover would be remembered for something else, something darker. It was a rainy Friday night when it began. Their parents had gone to bed early, leaving the sisters alone in the dim glow of the living room lamp. Thunder rumbled outside as the storm battered the windows. They made hot chocolate, whispered scary tales, and dared each other to keep the lights off. By midnight, the rain had slowed and the house was unnervingly quiet. Emma pulled her blanket closer and whispered, "You know what Mom says about storms, right?" Lily shook her head. Emma grinned. "Storms wake up the dead." Lily's face went pale. "Don't say that." Emma laughed, but as she glanced at the dark window, unease crept into her. For just a moment, she thought she saw a shadow pass by the glass. They settled down around 1 a.m., the fort collapsing in on itself as they burrowed into the blankets. The storm had passed, leaving the night heavy and silent. Too silent. Emma stirred, her eyes snapping open. Something was wrong. At first, she thought it was just the lingering quiet. Then she heard it. A shuffle. Soft, dragging footsteps, coming from the hallway. Emma sat up, heart pounding. Lily was fast asleep beside her. The footsteps grew louder, slow and deliberate. She held her breath, staring at the dark hallway beyond the living room, and then, just before the sound reached the doorway, it stopped. The next morning, Emma tried to brush it off. Maybe it was the old house creaking, maybe her imagination. But that night, the sisters begged their parents for another sleepover, hoping to wash away the unease with laughter. They built another fort, told more stories, and eventually drifted to sleep. At 3 a.m., Emma woke again. The footsteps were back. This time, Lily stirred too, sitting up groggily. "What's that?" she whispered. Emma didn't answer. She couldn't. The footsteps echoed closer, then stopped again at the doorway. The sisters clutched each other, staring into the black hall. Slowly, impossibly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall, gaunt, its limbs too long, its head bent at an unnatural angle. Its face was obscured in shadow, but Emma swore she saw a wide, toothless grin stretching across its features. The figure didn't move further. It just stood there, watching. The next morning, their parents laughed when they tried to explain. "You two watch too many scary movies," their father said. But Emma and Lily knew it was real. That night, Emma set her alarm for 2:55 a.m. She wanted proof. When the shrill beep woke her, she sat up instantly, scanning the doorway. For a while, nothing happened. Then the footsteps began again. Soft, dragging, coming closer. Lily whimpered and buried her face in the blanket. Emma forced herself to stay upright, staring as the figure appeared once more. This time, it stepped fully into the room. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet tugged by invisible strings, its head tilted, bones cracking audibly as it regarded them with that empty grin. Emma reached for her flashlight and flicked it on. The figure vanished. Days passed, but the sisters couldn't shake the fear. They stopped sleeping in the living room, hoping their bedroom would be safer. But it wasn't. On the fourth night, Emma woke to the sound of scratching. She turned her head slowly, dread rising in her chest. The foot of the bed, crouched low, was the figure. Its long fingers dragged slowly along the wooden frame, nails screeching softly. Emma choked on a scream, shaking Lily awake. By the time her sister opened her eyes, the figure was gone. But the scratches remained. Deep grooves in the wood. They tried telling their parents again, but were met with the same dismissal. So the sisters made a pact. They'd stay awake together, no matter how tired, to catch it. The following night, they clutched each other under the covers, staring into the dark. Hours passed. Then, at 3:12 a.m., the closet door creaked open. Emma's breath hitched. Lily whimpered. The figure crawled out on all fours, limbs bending grotesquely. It moved slowly across the floor, its head turning upside down, grin stretched wider than ever. Emma fumbled for her flashlight again, but the batteries were dead. The figure kept crawling closer until it was only feet away. And then, without warning, it melted into the floor, disappearing like smoke. From then on, it haunted them relentlessly. Sometimes it appeared in the corner of the room, sometimes in the reflection of the mirror. Once, Emma swore she saw it peering from behind their mother's shoulder at the dinner table, though no one else reacted. The exhaustion wore them down. They stopped going to school, stopped eating properly, their days consumed by the terror of night. Then came the final sleepover. It was Lily's idea. "If we stay in the living room again, maybe we can trap it," she whispered. "We'll make a circle of salt, like in the stories." Emma agreed, too tired to argue. That night, they poured a shaky ring of salt around their blankets and huddled together in the center. At exactly 3 a.m., the air grew heavy. The house seemed to hold its breath. The footsteps began. Slow, deliberate. The figure appeared in the doorway, taller than before, its grin impossibly wide. It stepped forward, one foot crossing the threshold, then another. When it reached the salt, it paused. Emma clutched Lily's hand, whispering, "It can't cross." But the figure tilted its head, and then stepped inside the circle as though the salt wasn't there at all. The sisters screamed as the figure loomed over them, its face finally clear. It had no eyes, only hollow sockets. Its grin stretched ear to ear, gums black and dripping. Its skin was paper-thin, veins pulsing beneath the surface. It reached down with one long hand and touched Lily's face. She froze, body going limp. Emma screamed, clawing at her sister, but the figure only laughed, a sound like bones snapping, and dragged Lily out of the blankets. "Take me instead," Emma begged, sobbing. The figure's grin widened. "You'll both do." The next morning, their parents found the living room in disarray. The salt circle was scattered, the blankets shredded. But there was no sign of Emma or Lily. Only 2 deep grooves in the floor, leading from the living room to the dark hallway. The house has never been the same. Neighbors say that on stormy nights, if you pass by the window, you can see 2 little girls sitting in the living room, clutching each other under a blanket. And behind them, something tall and grinning,